Pivotal Labs, where we are tonight, has been hosting us since almost the beginning of the Ember meetup. They are incredibly generous with space, food, drink, and so we're very grateful to them. Simple Reach is one of our Hacker Hours hosts. The Simple Reachers are back here in the middle. Raise your hand, Simple Reachers. Awesome. And then I need to add another sponsor to our list, which is our new Hacker Hours sponsor that's hosting once a month, Movable Link. And Movable Link has a beautiful space. We did one event there so far. It was great. And so we're really excited to have them helping out. They also are an Ember team, an Ember shop. So that is thank you to our sponsors. Upcoming events. So on, let's see, on the next upcoming thing is Monday, April 21st. That is this coming Monday, I believe. We're doing a Hacker Hours focused on Ghost. So for those of you who don't know the Ghost story, Ghost is an open source blogging tool. About a month ago or so, I think probably about a month ago, there was a very public discussion online on Twitter, on GitHub, about what JavaScript framework should Ghost use to build its admin UI, which needed to be a kind of very responsive single-page app. People spend a lot of time in the back end of their blogging tools, writing, editing, dealing with comments, that kind of thing. And so anyway, the end result of all that discussion was that they chose to use Ember. And so part of them choosing to use Ember was the quality of the Ember community. And so one of the things that we're trying to do now, and we're doing this not just in New York but in other parts of the country too, is to bring the local community kind of in around this project, which is a great learning opportunity for folks who are learning Ember, who are looking for an open source project to contribute to kind of on an app dev level. And we're lucky to have here in New York, I don't think he can be here tonight, but Harry Wolf, who's one of the hackers on Ghost, who's focused on front-end development with them. And so Harry is going to lead us, take us through how the Ghost UI admin works in general, what the kind of the roadmap is, and how we can contribute. So it should be a good event. There's 7 spots available. We try purposefully to keep the Hacker Hours relatively small and intimate so that people can A, get to know each other, B, get some personal help and attention. If you've got some specific Ember questions, you may find that this larger meetup is not a great place to kind of get one-on-one help. The Hacker Hours are better for that. So that's the next Hacker Hours, and Kevin will be working on getting the one following that in the calendar shortly. The next big talk that we're doing is going to be on May 29th, and our speakers are going to be Haejin Kim, who's from Simple Reach in the back here, and my friend Amit Schechter, together they are experts in both D3 and in working with Ember and D3. And so we're going to do kind of a 1-2 punch at that event where we do a basic intro to D3 for those of you who may not have used it before, and then following up with how do you work with D3 in an Ember project that Haejin's going to lead. So that should be really fun. We have room for lightning talks in May, so if you have something that you'd like to present or demo, something like that, definitely get in touch with me. A few other announcements. Since the last time we got together, Ember 1.50 and 1.6 beta branch were released. There's some really great stuff in here, a bunch of stuff around testing. One of my favorites, though, I'm just going to pick because I like it, is the way that models are inherited in route hierarchies now. And so basically, the way that it works is that if you have a route without a dynamic param, and you have a parent route that does have a dynamic param, and if you don't implement a model hook at all, the model will be the parent's model. So we were seeing a lot of apps in the wild where people would do, model return this model for post, like you can see right here, and it was just basically boilerplate, and it was almost always the default option if you weren't going to do something different. And so, we found in the apps that we've been working with that the introduction of this feature lets us just really clean up these routes, and in many cases the routes just disappear altogether because that was the only thing that we were doing in the route. So that's cool. There's definitely read through this blog post. There's other important stuff going on. And then the last thing is Alex Navarsardi in here yet? All right, I'm going to let him say a few words later when he arrives. I know he is in New York, but I will just give a quick plug to the Wicked Good Ember Conference, which is going to be the East Coast's first Ember Conference, June 17th in Boston, Mass. The first batch of the first batch of speakers was just announced, and I'm excited to be one of them. So that's going to be cool. Thanks. The initial batch looks great. Robin Ward, Robert Jackson, Eric Brin, Joe Fiorini. So I'm going to have my work cut out for me to come up with a talk that holds my own with them. But there's still tickets available. I would definitely recommend picking one up. We'll be taking the train up probably from here in New York. So if you guys want to coordinate and get an Ember train going, that would be fun. So at this point, I want to, before we get into our lightning talks, which we've got a really great batch that I'm really looking forward to, I wanted to turn it over just to open the floor for announcements from you guys. And for people who haven't been here, this can include hiring announcements, other relevant events that are coming up. If you are looking for work, if you're looking for somebody to collaborate with on an open source project, kind of a free-for-all. So any announcements from the community? Got one right here. Hold on, let me give you this.
Hi, my name is David Morowicz, and I'm looking for a job, so see me later if you have a job available.
Good stuff. Do you know some Ember? No, I don't. Okay, doesn't know Ember, but looking for a job. So it's okay. So, some people are willing to train. Oh, what was your name? What was your name? David is his name. So talk to David. Everybody wants to see you, David. Stand up and wave. All right, there you go. Cool. So why don't we have Isaac come up and plug in while we're wrapping up? Any other announcements? Nope. Brad, where's Brad? Brad, did you want to make an announcement? Cool. If you didn't hear that, or for the folks at home, NBC News is hiring Ember developers. So good stuff. Any other hiring announcements? Okay. Yep.
Hey, I'm Josh Brandoff from the Harmony Institute, which is only a few blocks away from here, and we're hiring a data scientist. And one of the apps we're going to be building, I want to use Ember, so someone who has a data science background and is interested in doing Ember, come and talk to me.
Good stuff. All right, any other announcements before we get into lightning talks? Okay, awesome. So our first speaker tonight, you have seen the app that he works on demoed previously at Ember.js NYC. It's 2B, and our speaker is going to tell us a little bit about how he approached internationalizing 2B. And so I'm happy to introduce for the first time, speaking at Ember NYC, Isaac Ezer.
Thank you very much. Can you guys hear me okay? Cool, so thanks for the intro, Luke. So quick bio about me, since you know what I'm going to talk about. So I grew up in Toronto. We're all very proud of our mayor. I studied computer science, was born and raised there, and then when I graduated, I moved to Tokyo. Anyone know who this is? Yes. All right. Who is it? Yes, thank you. So I lived in Tokyo for about 5 years. I was mostly doing C++ development over there, and also playing a bit of jazz piano on the side. And then after about 5 years, I decided to do something else, so I moved to New York about last August, and I started working at 2B. So this is a screenshot. This is my beautiful field that I created. So like Luke said, it's been demoed a few times before. We definitely use Ember. If you haven't seen it before, it's basically an online gallery space where you can collage anything you find on the web. You can paint right in the browser and make pretty cool animated boards, or fields as we call them. So I'm not much of a visual artist, but here's some recent work from a guy named John Fogarty that I think is pretty cool. This came up on the site a couple days ago. And so I was at EmberConf in Portland a couple of weeks ago. Put your hand up if you were at EmberConf. So I met Jamie White from London, who runs the London meetups, and I told him about Tubi. He thought it was really cool, and he put this field together with everyone who was there. So I'll give you guys a minute to find your friends and find yourselves. So anyway, a couple months ago, my boss said we want to kind of promote the site in Japan, and we're going to want to translate the site into Japanese. So Isaac, you lived in Japan, you speak a little Japanese. Do you want to take this on? I said sure. So the first thing I did was Google Ember I18N, and thankfully, I found a pretty good library from a guy named James Rosen who works at Zendesk. So you can check this out. It's really nice, and it provides this handlebars helper T. Kind of like what we have the T function for templates in Rails. We use Rails in the back end, so I'll be talking a bit about Rails and how we connect. So we have this great handlebars helper, and it gives you some nice things like variable interpolation, translatable properties. So I'm going to explain the different aspects. So the way we set up our app is the server first figures out what locale we want to use, and we let the client know when we send the HTML. So there's a few different ways we could find that. Maybe there's a query parameter, so if the user wants to explicitly set it, especially if they clicked on a link to change the language, then we would get that query parameter. Or we might check a cookie if we had stored it on a previous visit. Or there's a nice Rails gem called HTTP accept language, which looks at the header for what language the user prefers, which is really handy. So this would be, that third step would be the first thing that the app would do when it gets a new user, and then it might store the cookie. So then, so there's optional query parameter, and then we might want to set the cookie. We also find it useful to put the locale in like a meta tag. This is another way you could put it in the HTML, so when the Ember app boots up, the Ember app knows what the preferred locale is. So now on the client, you initialize your Ember app, and in app.ready, you do a few things. So you want to send this variable emi18n.locale. So maybe you'll pull the cookie out, or you'll pull it out of that meta tag that we had set up. And another important thing you're going to need to do is, basically you're going to have a dictionary for each language that'll have all your translations. So you need to set translations to point to that dictionary, and then you're all set. So some of you might be wondering, can we make this all happen dynamic? Do you have to refresh the page? You could. James's library is not built that way, but it turns out it's not really useful because every user is just going to come, change their language once, and then they're done. So it's a lot easier to just have them refresh the page once, and then you have the right locale. So now let's see some JavaScript or CoffeeScript. I'm going to do my examples in CoffeeScript. So we could set up a file with our translations. So maybe we might want to call it en.js.coffee. We create our I18N object if we don't have it already, and then we set up some translations. And then you could set up a Japanese version. So hello is konnichiwa, thanks is arigato. And once you have that, when you use it in your templates, let's say a Japanese user was there, that's what they would see. So it translates it for you. Very easy to use. If you want to get a bit more complicated, you can have variables in these handlebars helpers. So the way you would define the translation, you would specify kind of the placeholder with a variable, and say name. And then when you use that translation in the template, you specify the variable name, and it gets interpolated. You could also bound it to a property on a controller or model, which is obviously very handy. So if I had a user object with a name equal to Isaac, either way I would have gotten hello Isaac. One quick caveat about using these variables is that they require the full handlebars compiler. So if you guys are using just the handlebars runtime, this interpolation is not going to work. You need to decide to either ship with the full handlebars compiler or not use this. And it turns out there's a neat other way to do this type of variable interpolation. So you can, instead of just defining a translating string, you can define a function. And I actually just figured this out a couple days ago, so it's pretty cool. So you can pass in a dictionary. Hello gets a dictionary of attributes, and you can pull out the name. And the way you use that in the template is exactly the same. So hello name is Isaac, or name binding user.isaac, and you would get hello Isaac. Yes? Pardon me? Yes. You have to make some slight modifications to the library, just a couple lines of code. So I actually have a fork of James' library that doesn't need the compiler and implements this type of thing. Another thing that the I18N library has, which is really cool, is translatable properties. So you can add this mix into a controller or a model or anything, and then you get this feature that any property you define with translation at the end, the library is going to translate it before it gets to a template. So for example, if we had defined this translation for restaurant, and then we use restaurant in the template, then it will get translated. A really nice use of this is if you extend Ember text fields, and then you can translate different properties of the text fields. So we find this very useful for placeholders, because we want to translate all the placeholders in our forms with the right text. So I guess you can see, we have email and password as a placeholder translated. And what have we got next? So there's no reason why you can't have HTML in your translations. You just need the three handlebars. What's that called? The triple mustache? I guess I should know, but triple mustache. And then you could have a translation. And you might want to think about, for things like Chrome, they might have a Japanese version of their site. So, go the extra mile and see if you can link to something that would be appropriate to those users. So those are the main juicy parts of James's library that'll get you started. So here's a screenshot of to be in English, what you come when you see it for the first time, and in Japanese it looks like this. So a few kind of lessons learned, things to think about. If you think you're going to need this stuff, you're going to need to translate, I recommend getting the library set up and just start putting all your English text in an English file. Because it's a real pain to hunt through all the code as your app gets bigger and bigger to find all the text. Then there's really a long tail of rarely seen content. There's error messages and like emails that rarely get sent, or error messages that almost never pop up. And it took a few iterations to finding all of those and tons of refactoring. But if you just start putting that in en.js and don't have any other files from day one, and the day you decide to translate the site, you just send that one file to a translator and it'll get done pretty fast. Another thing to keep in mind, don't forget about things like currency, units of measurements, address formats. Like I said, go the extra mile to kind of really get the users in these different parts of the world comfortable. So in To Be, we have this store. You can buy t-shirts. You can see the prices in dollars. We have sizes in inches, as we're used to in the US. And this nice little feature in our address form, you type in the zip code, it figures out your city. It wouldn't be ideal if we default to that type of thing in Japanese. So I set it up so if the user's using their Japanese locale, right away we have Japan set for the country. The form allows them to set in their state and city. It's not giving an error like, I don't know, the zip code. We have the price in yen and the measurements in centimeters. Just another example outside of TV. So a lot of sites that really have big user bases in multiple cultures will go and completely redesign their website for these different cultures, which is definitely something to consider. So a good example is Rakuten, which is a great Japanese kind of success story. It's kind of like the Amazon of Japan. You can buy anything on Rakuten, and this is their Japanese site. And Japanese aesthetic, they love so much stuff on the page. Like, give me all the information you can, I want it right there, which is cool, which is awesome. But in English, maybe, the prevailing aesthetic is maybe a bit more white space. I'm not saying either is good or bad, but it's just cool that they didn't just translate the site, they really addressed the fact that different designs are going to be popular in different languages. And one last thing I found useful while I was working on this. So we used moment.js, and they're translated into something like 30 languages. And it was really easy to go to their GitHub and download the extra language file. They have a version that ships with all 40 languages. You don't want that. Pick the languages you need, drop it into your source, call this function, and then you can see down here we have 24 days ago, and that gets translated into Japanese with no extra work on my part. So that's pretty much it. I have some links here. So James Rosen's library. I have my own fork that works without the handlebars compiler. There's my website. James has another nice library for doing pluralization logic. Which I haven't really used, but it works. He built them both to work together, so it's really handy. And yeah, thanks. I'm very happy to take questions.
Questions for Isaac? Let's go here first.
How did your fork get around needing the handlebars compiler?
Pardon me?
How did your fork get around?
I basically just wrote a separate function that just returns whatever's in the template. So if it's a string, return the string. If it's a function, return the function.
Is there a nice way to handle, let's say, like English Great Britain versus English, and have most of the translations be the same, and just like override, like let's say, the word, the spelling of color?
Yeah, totally. Because when you the HTTP request headers usually have a section for the language and then a section for the country. So you'd actually get en-gb, and then you just need a few extra locale files. So it'd be pretty easy.
Would you have to copy like your en.js, basically it would be the same as the engb, or is there a way to just like only have like basically just override?
Yeah, you would have to copy it. It would be pretty simple to modify the library to fall back to a different one or English. We thought about falling back to English because we don't want to show errors that the key is missing, which is the default behavior, but it's also nice to have that and then you fix it. Otherwise, you're showing English to people for new features and you kind of forget about it. Any other questions?
One more question? Okay, cool.
Cool, thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks, Isaac. All right. So our next speaker is going to tell us about what it's like to build on top of the Google Drive API, which is I'm pretty excited to see. This gentleman's been part of Ember NYC for quite a while now. How long? When's the first time you came?
Like 4 months ago.
Cool. So about 4 months, and he's worked his courage up to give his first presentation. So be kind and welcome to the stage, Venkat Dinavahi.
Testing. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
All right.
So take it away.
All right. Play. Hey everyone, I'm Venkat, and I help run Coderly. We build apps for startups. Today, I'm going to talk about how to build real-time collaborative apps using the Ember skills that you already have and integrate that with Google Drive and their ecosystem. So, what's Google Drive? You probably already know what it is. Every time you create a Google Doc or a spreadsheet and you share with your friends, you're using Google Drive. What you're looking at here is the Google Drive browser. So when you click on a spreadsheet or a doc, what you're doing is you're opening up an app on Google Drive. Now, for the longest time, Google Drive has had their typical suite of Office tools, and they recently opened up their infrastructure for people to take advantage of. For example, just like you can create a document or a spreadsheet, you could make your own app that integrates with the rest of the system. So how does this work? It's important to note that the Google Drive browser is really just a list. It's really just a list of shortcuts. So when you click on a document, on your document, it's going to open up yourapp.com/whatever and pass along whatever it needs to open the file or create a file. So it'll send along the user ID and the folder ID when you're creating, and it'll send along the file ID when you're opening it up. And so essentially, you could create a Rails app or a WordPress site or whatever you want completely separate from the Google Drive browser, and the only connection between the two is the URLs. And you can have your own database in there and everything. But Google Drive provides a real-time API that you might want to take advantage of. This is what powers their Google Docs and their spreadsheets and allows multiple people to edit the same document at the same time and have the updates be pushed to all of the clients in real time. The problem is the Google Drive API is kind of low level. You have to manually attach event listeners. You have to bind things by hand, which is why when I was working on my project, I extracted out Ember.js Drive, which is essentially an Ember data adapter, which allows you to write your app without thinking about real-time persistence, collaboration, and you can use your fixtures. Just think about writing the Ember app, and once you have that, then you can replace your fixture adapter with the Google Drive adapter and do a little bit more, and then now you have a real-time collaborative app. So how does this work? Basically, you need to set up your API keys. I'm not going to go into that. With authentication, you need to set a flag. Requires auth. Set that to true, and then that allows you to handle when a user is unauthenticated. And if you want to allow a user to log in, then you can call the login method, and that will show the Google login dialog. I'm going to gloss over this because that's subject to change, but essentially you need to tell the adapter, just like a REST adapter needs to know what URL, what API URL it needs to talk to, the Google Drive adapter needs to know the ID of the file that it needs to persist to. So I'm going to show a demo of the application. So I have, just like you have a doc, you have a storyboard. I can create a storyboard and type the name of the map. And you can note that I wrote this using the fixture adapter, and then once I was ready, I switched the adapters, and then everything pretty much worked. So you can say, okay, and actually, I can demonstrate how, just like a Google Doc, you can have multiple people editing it at the same time. And yeah, this is all pure Ember. I didn't have to think about how am I going to save the data, how am I going to persist it, how am I going to deal with collaboration. You can see up here at the top, there's the two collaborators. I'm collaborating with myself right now. So yeah, I encourage you all to it's really experimental. I pulled it out today. I think there's a big opportunity. People have been using Google Docs for everything under the sun. Now you can make your own custom types, markdown editors, whatever you want. Any questions? The link to my app, it's on the GitHub repository now. It's pure Ember. There's no backend or anything except when communicating. When you want to create a storyboard, you have to install it either through, they have an app store that you can list it on, or you could, on your website, have a button, authenticate button, and when they click on that, it will present a dialog that will allow them to install it. And then it will show up in your create menu at that point.
Cool. It's pretty awesome to be able to integrate that tightly with Ember.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's have a round of applause for Venkat. Great stuff. Any other questions before we move on this one? All right, cool. Awesome. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Let's get Dennis coming up. Oh, wait, we have pizza. All right. Let me check the time. 7:36. All right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a break. We're going to grab a slice. We're going to come back, and before Dennis connects, we're going to have a special remote guest. So I'll leave you in suspense while you get a slice. Okay, so as you know, the theme of the evening tonight for our main talk is debugging. And I was talking to... I was talking to this gentleman with the cone head behind me, and he volunteered to share some of his debugging tips, particularly around debugging performance issues. And so we're really excited to have remote from California core team member Eric Bryn. Hello, Eric. No. Sorry. Okay,
Hello, everyone.
oh, hello, Eric.
What?
No.
Hi, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay, now we can.
All right, great. So this is fun.
So Eric,
All right,
before
so thanks for the introduction. I don't know, are we supposed to have a conversation here?
Eric, before we dig into the debugging stuff, I've heard a rumor that you're going to be in New York again. You seem to come pretty frequently, but this time, is it true that you're doing a training here?
Yes, I am returning to New York very soon. The date is May 21st. I'm actually going to be back in New York to speak at Manhattan.js. And then the next day, I will be doing a training session with Robin Ward.
Awesome. Where can people find out about the details if they would like to attend this training?
So let's see if this stuff works. We did not queue this up exactly perfectly. All right. So I do training with Trek, and we're doing sessions in San Francisco and Chicago. So if you go to prototypal.io or you Google for Ember training, you will probably find me. The New York training class with details and dates and times and location are up at NYC. Sorry, there's massive echo. I should just mute you guys.
You can probably mute us while you're talking.
So nyc-ember-training.ericray.com. So check it out. It's listed in the meetup group, and I'll post it in today's event.
Good stuff. So you got, for folks who are looking for a classroom training kind of experience, you do pretty well learning from Eric and Robin. These guys have been in the trenches with Ember for quite a while, and both have been speaking frequently and working on their teaching skills around the framework. So awesome. So what do you have to share with us tonight on performance debugging?
Yes, so I wanted to cover a common debugging situation that you might find yourself in, and also just cover a few little things here and there along the way. I'm going to take my headphones off, so whoever I'm staring at, it's your job to tell me if I need to put them back in. So basically, what we're going to walk through is an example of a slow rendering situation with an Ember app, and this is kind of the dreaded long list problem. So we're switching to our bar route here. We've already clicked it, and wow, it took forever to load. We've got a big list here with, I think, 5,000 items in it, and so this sucks. If we switch to another route, we'll see that it takes forever to destroy all of those views. And wouldn't it be great if we could figure out what exactly is slow about this? And we're not going to go super deep dive because we don't have a lot of time. But basically, I just want to show you some techniques that I use when I sit down with the new Ember app and I'm trying to figure out where the slowdowns are. So we're going to, inside of Chrome here, we've got the web inspector open, the DevTools on the right. And we're going to go to the Profiles tab, and we're going to collect a JavaScript CP profile. So we're going to click Start here, and then we're going to go and we're going to navigate to our flow page in our Ember app. So it's going to take a little while. Eventually, Chrome will finish, and then we will stop our profile. So if we run to the profile here now, we see a list, and hopefully this is big enough for everyone. Shake your head, yes or no? Maybe. Can you guys see this all right? All right, great. So here we are, we're in a profile. Hopefully, some of you have seen this before. If not, that's fine. And the important thing to note right off the bat is the number one item is idle, but ignore that. That just means that our profile is running for longer than the work was actually being done in JavaScript. So we'll ignore idle. We'll look at program. And program is interesting because that basically means native code. And by native code, I mean the browser's code in C++. And so that can mean sometimes native JavaScript functionality, or it can mean DOM. So we know that we're creating a big list of 5,000 rows here. And so we see program being the majority of the work, 3,900 milliseconds. So 3.9 seconds is being spent just creating DOM. So we immediately know that we're creating too much DOM, right? So there's really only one strategy here, which is to just eliminate the amount of DOM, to reduce the amount of DOM that we're creating. And it's important to note that some of the work we're doing upcoming on HTML bars will hopefully, is not necessarily going to improve the speed of this part of the profile, but instead the speed of all of the long tail of things that are going to be happening that Ember's doing for us. So we still have this problem of creating too much DOM, and really the only solution we have is to just reduce the amount of DOM that we create. But so this is the information we got from Chrome, but I think it's really important to point out that Safari and Firefox have different profilers, and they both have unique traits that make it really cool and useful to use them when you're debugging performance problems. So here we are in Safari. Actually, let me make sure that this window is getting shared correctly. Hello, everyone, again. So here's Safari. Can't tell. Nope, that's Chrome again. Sorry. There we go. All right, so here we are in Safari. And so at the same page we were before, here in Safari, we go to the Timelines tab, and then we can start a profile by clicking Start JavaScript Profile here. So I'm going to go ahead and start a profile, and then I'm going to click the link over to our slow page in our Ember app. Cue the Ember Jeopardy music, and boom. So here in Safari, we expectedly are still seeing most of the time being spent in what is called program, right? Which is going to be JavaScript and DOM native code. So here we see, the majority of time is spent here. But what I wanted to point out about Safari was that, make the font bigger. Let's maybe make the window smaller. Does that make it better? I don't know that I can actually make the font much bigger. It doesn't let me scale it. Does that work better, Alex? Is that better? Yeah, it doesn't work in Safari. Ah. All right. So here's what I wanted to point out. We're not going to go into too much detail. But basically, Safari and Chrome differ, their profiles differ in, the profilers differ in one significant way. Chrome has a sampling profile, which means that it basically pulls the JavaScript runtime asking for stacks of the code that's currently being executed. Whereas Safari does not have a sampling profiler. So unlike Chrome, Safari can actually show you call counts. And so it can tell you and give you an idea for how many times a specific function in your application is getting called. And sometimes when you're trying to debug performance problems, in this case, it's not too helpful, other than seeing that we're using a debug build of Ember, and there's a bunch of time getting spent in assert statements, which wouldn't exist if you use the ember.prod or ember.min version of Ember. But you can see, and this is really helpful for debugging performance problems, or maybe catching yourself doing crazy things, because you might say, oh, I'm only rendering 10 things. Why is this function getting called 1,000 times? And that might help you figure out where other performance problems might be, that otherwise you wouldn't have much transparency into. So that's really the main point that I want to make about Safari, about Safari's profiler, is that call counts are really handy. Then there's one other name in town, and that's Firefox. So let me go ahead and share Firefox with you guys. And so Firefox is interesting because they've also got a profiler. And if you go into the dev tools here by clicking, you go into the dev tools and you open up the toolbox options by clicking the gear here, you can actually enable this option called Show Gecko Platform Data. And this is really cool because I'm not an expert at this yet, but this is really cool because it will actually show you the native code in the stacks. So you can actually see when you're going through here that there's something in Gecko called JS run script, right? And if we dive in deep enough, we'll eventually see DOM methods and stuff as well when we get into DOM related stuff. So I don't have enough time. I got to catch a shuttle in a few minutes back to San Francisco. But I just wanted to point out that there's some cool features that each different browser's profiler has. And sometimes it's nice when you're debugging performance problems to jump around and use the different features that are available in different profilers. So that's all I got. Other than Indiana Jones here.
Awesome. So hopefully we'll get a chance to grill you on some more of this when you're in New York.
Yep.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Yep. Thanks, bro. Take care. All right. Dennis, you want to come plug in? How many folks are doing Ember on a daily basis in the group? Raise your hand. Cool. Most people. Awesome. How many people are new to Ember? So kind of in the learning phase? Cool. Some of the same people. That's okay. One of the most fundamental pieces of Ember and most powerful things is computed properties. And they are surprisingly deep. And so here to give us kind of an overview of them and then to dive deep with us is my friend and colleague, Dennis Nazareth.
Hi, guys. I'm Dennis. I was a YAP apprentice from September for a few months, and now I'm doing Ember consulting and also working with YAP Labs a little bit. And I'm gonna go over computed properties first, the basics, and then we're gonna go deeper and see what more complicated stuff you can do, and kind of abusing them, and seeing what can happen. So let's get started. So a computed property allows you to define an object property as a function, and the return value of that function can be read with a get. That function will be called only once, and the return value will be cached, so they're very efficient. You can have dependent properties. You pass in a list of things it depends on, and every time the dependencies change, the property will be recomputed, meaning that the function will refire, and you will allow to change the value of your computed property based on its dependencies. So this is the classic example from the Ember guide. If you have a first name and a last name, you can combine those into a full name by defining this property as a function. And Ember does its magical extension of the function prototype. So you can call on a function .property and pass in a list of string properties that your computed property depends on. So every time, if either first name or last name is updated, it will fire the function, and you will get the correct live value of full name. So if I get full name, it's Dennis Nazarov. If I set my full name to Maxim, this function will refire, and if I get full name again, I'll get the correct Maxim Nazarov. Yeah, so and what I was saying before, if your dependencies do not change, your function is only fired once. So if you get it multiple times, the value is cached, and it's a very efficient retrieval of that value. So the question is, what happens if you set a computed property? Would anyone like to answer that? Well, let's see. You can define the behavior based on the arguments passed to the function. So I think the best way to understand what happens is just looking at the implementation. So this file is called computed.js, and it lives in Ember Metal. And Ember Metal is where all the fun stuff lives, and all the magical things that happen in Ember that you don't understand and you take for granted. It's in that folder. So if you have some free time, you should really explore and see how observers work and computed properties work. So we're going to see how the computed properties set is defined. Does anybody know what the word arity means in computer science? Oh, yeah, sorry. Arity, and that's this word here. Yeah, so the guy that's looking for words said it's the number of parameters passed into a function. And on the function prototype, you can call .length, and it will give you this value. If we go up, we can see that. So Ember arity is just function length, which gives you the number of parameters you specify that can be passed into your function. Oops. And so the code path is right here. So if you set one value, so this is what I was saying, go back to what I was saying before, is that this is the setter path. So if you have three values that the function, well, let's do the base path of what I started in my talk, was that if you don't define any arguments, that it will go to this final else case. And it will just set your computed property to null, meaning that whatever you define as your function will be blown away, and you will get the value right here. The function will just become the value, and that will be cached. So if you get it, you will just get the cached value. You will basically squash your computed property. And if you set it with 2 arguments, you will pass in the value that you have in .set, and if you pass it with 3 values, you will have the value plus the cached value, which is the previous value. So this allows you to do some powerful things, and by defining, by checking the argument, by passing in more than one argument, you can have control of what to do inside your computed property when it's a set or a get. So, and this is an example of what to do, how we can set first and last name back if we set full name downwards from our app. If we have 2 arguments, we will go inside the if block, and we are able to split full name with a regular expression and set first name and last name. And this is just the basic stuff, so there's nothing really that interesting, but we can take this pattern into to do more complicated things. This allows us to see the computed property as data flowing through it downwards and upwards. The get is when the data comes down to where you're watching it. So, like for example, in your template, and a set flows up. So in a set, you can mutate what you're depending on, but also other things. So yeah, you can access anything within the context of your object. And you can avoid unnecessary combinations of computed properties and observers. So usually, when you have your computed property just controlling the value, but if you want to do some related logic that depends on your computed property, you would do it in an observer. But if you do a set and a get pattern in a computed property, you can sort of encapsulate it all inside that computed property. But this can be a bad practice, so you have to use it responsibly. And this brings me to a few demos of how we can do this. So this is an Ember progress bar that Steph and Penner implemented on a project we were working on together, and it uses a setter computed property to do the following. You get this nice progress bar that is like the iOS when you send an iMessage, it looks like that. And we're gonna go over how this is implemented. We go into the router and we override transition to, and first we access our application controller by looking it up on the container. This is not a real progress bar because it just kind of animates to a value that's between 40 and 70% by calling this random function. So it looks like you load somewhere and it stops, and when your promise resolves, meaning that your AJAX request fulfills, it'll animate to 100%. You could wire this to like an upload progress, but this kind of gives the user nice feedback because like a big criticism of the model hooks locking your route transitions is that when a user clicks a link, you're kind of stuck until the promise resolves without any UI response. So here we call super, and what the transition to function returns is an object in which you can access the promise of the transition. So we call it super, and we apply the context of the router and pass in the arguments. So it basically calls the function higher up with the same way it would be called usually with all the same arguments, but we are able to access the promise. And then when that promise finally resolves, regardless of if it's fulfilled or rejected, we set our loading progress to 100%. Here I define some routes, and they extend the slow route, and this is just a promise that resolves in 1 second. And the actual logic happens inside this Ember component, which has a computed property called progress, which is we set in the template and we set it to loading progress. So this is our application template, and the context of the application template is the application controller, which we set the loading progress on. So progress becomes bound to loading progress. So when we set loading progress in our transition to, it is set on the application controller loading progress and bound to this computed property in our component. So when we set it, it fires it sees that we have 2 arguments defined in our function, and it becomes a setter computed property, and it goes down the code path that you see here. And as you will see, that there is no get, there's no downflow value. If you get progress from inside the computed property, you wouldn't get anything, because it just handles the logic of being set. So let's see what happens. Basically, we always set its private value of progress to value, which allows us to trigger another computed property which will calculate the style of the function which we bind to the attribute. And this will compute the CSS style. And the CSS style is a transition which just animates the width in half a second. So that's what gives us the animation. So basically, we can throw in this conditional logic of seeing that if the value is 100%, we can toggle our isLoading property after the animation completes in 500 milliseconds, and that's what you see is the progress bar fading out. It's triggered by this logic. So we're able to do this later view logic all inside the computed property, like this really nice way of managing complexity. And then my next example is a little game I made. So it's like, as a kid, you play these memory games where you flip over 2 tiles and you have to match basically the pictures. And there's a little bug where it does work where it's different every time, but there's only 2 tiles of the same person, and it's Alex Matchneer. So, oh, there we go. Second try. So just to see how it works, there's an array of strings which maps to image tags, and we render these tiles. We have our index controller, which specifies an item controller of square, and each square has the context of the item controller. So when you click the tile, there's an action called toggle active, which is right here, and we just toggle the property is active. And inside of that property is a computed property that implements the set behavior by, as I said before, having 2 arguments passed to the function. And inside the setter, we have conditional logic that checks if the value is true, we're going to push this object to our array on our parent controller. And if it's false, we're going to remove it. But the get value is here, and that no matter what, that the value of is active is whether this object is present in the active squares array. So it also is dependent on active squares. And a caveat of computed properties is that if you have a dependency of an array, you can just specify the array itself, because the array is just an object, and if you observe, the instance of the array will never change, so you have to add each, which will cause the property to fire each time one of the array items is either added, removed, or changed. So in the index controller, we have another computed property, which is to check if you're a winner. And it also observes its active squares. And the way we check if you're a winner is that if your array length is 2 and your first object content equals the second object content, so that means that the string Alex A match near has to equal the string A match near. It will set its value to true, and that will flash the is winner message that you win. And it will also call reset squares, which in 2 seconds here will clear out the array. And so what happens when the array is cleared out is that it causes the isActive property to refire, which changes the value of this, and that's what makes all the tiles close again. So, I mean, this is a kind of a contrived example where I think there's a much easier implementation of there's kind of coupling of the child array, the child object needing to know about the parent array, and I would just maybe toggle a property on it and have a filter of active squares to filter down based on like is active just on the parent array, so the child array wouldn't have to know about it. But I think this demonstrates like a complicated data flow of where you have like 3 possibilities. You can be getting information, pulling it down. You can be setting information, pulling it, pushing it up. And in a set, you can do specific logic to like what you're changing based on that property. And the third thing that happens is that the dependent value is also firing, which allows you to compute. So that's pretty much it. Yep.
Computer property questions for Dennis? Anybody have anything? Cool. So yeah, using setters and computer properties is definitely a pretty powerful technique. And thank you for sharing. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Alex, wherever you are, if you want to hook up. We're going to keep right on rolling. We've got a talk next up on benchmarking your JavaScript. So Eric showed us a little bit about something is slow. How do you figure out what aspect of it is slow? And our next speaker is going to talk to us about how to figure out which of 2 code paths, which of 2 options for how to implement something is faster. And it's a surprisingly challenging problem to actually know the answer to that question. And so our speaker's given variations of this talk, I know at Mountain West JS and in the Boston Ember meetup, I believe, maybe not yet. And but I'm happy to have him tonight.
Hello?
Hey, perfect.
There you go.
Happy to welcome back to NYC Alex Navrarsardian.
All right. Hey guys, happy to be here. Let me start with the announcement. So my name is Alex. I work for Duckyard, and we are actually. Wanted to invite you to Wicked Ember. That's the first regional Ember Conf that's going to take place on June 17th in Boston. So tickets are on sale. There's a group discount, and the code is ember-NYC, all lowercase. It's a 5% discount. It's gonna be, I think it's gonna be 10 speakers total. We have 5 speakers already. So it's Luke, Joe Fiorini, Rob, Robert Jackson, Robin Ward, and surprisingly beardless Eric Brin. Yeah, so we're looking for sponsors. So feel free to reach out to us. Yeah, so let's get into that. Yeah, so I'm Tuchel on Twitter, Tuchel on GitHub. So I work at Duckyard. I write Ember.js code, Rails code as well. So anyway, benchmarking. Benchmarking is generally hard. It's hard because like there are a lot of things involved. there's like assembler code, which native machines they actually execute, and there is C++ code that browsers are written in, right? And then there's JavaScript code that you write, and then there's hardware, because like depending on the hardware, you get different variation, different results. So there's like a shit ton of things you have to consider. Well, at least you have to be aware of. So an important thing to understand is like when you write code, you just like scratching the surface. You're like touching this one little thing called JavaScript, right? So there's your code, there's a compiler, and by compiler I mean generally any browser will have a compiler. Will take your code, will do shit to it. Well, not really shit, but do things to it, right? And then it's gonna spit out something else, which is gonna be like assembler, native code, whatever. And we have like what 4 browsers. They have different compilers, obviously. SpiderMonkey, Firefox, Caracan, I think it's Opera, Chakra, which is IE, and then V8, which I'm going to be talking about. So right, and then there's like native code. Like you have no idea what's happening there. Right. So basically, the bottom line is the code that you write is not the code that gets executed. That's like just something to keep in mind. So, just to give you a quick example of benchmarks that people write or people come up with, like converting a string to a number, right? So double tilde. If you write JavaScript, you're probably aware of that. So this is like a super simple example. When you have a string, right, and you loop over this conversion, right, and you're just basically converting 8 to a number. So right, like really simple. So what the compiler is going to do is it's going to look at the code and say like, okay, cool. So I have a constant, right? So I might have just as well inline it, right? Like, what's the point of having the variable there? I'm just going to inline that, and there's an inline version, a conversion happening. So why do I have to run this conversion in the loop? Doesn't make any sense. I'm just going to do it once, and it's going to be a constant. So, and you end up having like benchmark in the assignment. So like this is compilers 101. This is called constant propagation that happens pretty much in every compiler. Then like if you're like, okay, so there's a constant, right? I might as well just do it like not a constant. I just do date.now to string, right? So a is not a constant anymore, so there will be no constant propagation. But compilers are not dumb, so what they do, they hoist the operation out of the loop, right? So you have C there, which is a constant again, right? So you basically benchmarking the assignment again, right? So, but what the compiler is going to do is going to look at the B variable, right? So you're actually not using it, and you're not using C, so it's just going to take the whole thing out, and it's going to be like, wow, happy benchmarking, right? Your code is like infinitely fast, which is a good thing, but Anyways, so another thing that all the compilers do, they do inline. So imagine you have this benchmark function that, in this particular case, it just concatenates the string, right? So what the compiler is going to do is going to inline the function, and it inlines the function and basically like concatenates this string, and this string is a constant, so it takes it out. So you're benchmarking nothing again. All right, so generally, like, what do you actually need to know to write benchmarks? And benchmarks, like, really, I guess, like hardcore benchmarks, like when you want to know if like there's a framework or like the library that you wrote, and you want to know if it's performant or like good enough, right? So you need to know a little bit about compilers, and this concepts, they come from V8, but more or less all the compilers they share the same concepts, right? So V8 has this concept of hidden classes, which are not actually classes. It's more like just metadata for V8. V8 actually doesn't care about variables. It doesn't really know what the variable is, so it cares about the metadata, right? So the problem is, like, why do you need this metadata? Well, the problem is that the JavaScript is dynamically typed language, so everything changes pretty much in runtime. Well, it could be the case. So anyway, so there's this function, right? Person that's going to return you is going to create a person object, and hello. All right. So and we create two instances of the function Iron Man and Captain America, right? So what's going to happen is that when you step in the function, it's going to create a hidden class, which is a metadata saying like, oh, so there's a new function. Cool. So class is C0, whatever. And every time you're going to change the prototype, change the shape or the layout of the object, it's going to create new classes, right? So if you create the first name, so you create a new, changing the layout of the object, it's going to create a new class called C1. It's going to be based on C0, but with a new property. So the same thing happened with last name. It's going to have the new class C2. So, and as soon as you call the same function, it has the chain already in the memory, so it knows about the new person metadata. So instead of like creating a new chain, it's going to reuse the chain that is already in the memory that it already knows about. But as soon as you change the layout of the object again, it's going to have to, like, it's going to create a new class. So that's pretty much happened with any property. So just the assignment will create a new hidden class. So why would you even like keep track of that? Well, it turns out that if you have this metadata, you can create caching. So you can speed up your code dramatically. And the caching mechanism, well, it's actually not a mechanism, it's just a way to implement cache called inline cache. So basically, given that, so in this particular example, right, these dead puppies, that's just an array. And what happens there is that V8 tries to access that array in the memory. So there's definitely a corresponding code, assembler code, which calls that load IC initialize, which actually goes and grabs stuff from a particular place in the memory, returns you back that array. So if this operation runs often enough, V8 is actually smart enough to just replace that function call load IC initialize with just an address in the memory. So instead of calling a function, it just returns you stuff right away. So that's how V8 optimizes function calls. That's just how it works. So that's why you might have heard about like de-optimization in V8. Like, you know, your code runs fast and then just like something happens and it's runs slow. That's when this assumption, this happy assumption that the function returns the same value every time is proven to be wrong, and V8 has to swap the optimized code with the slow code, de-optimized one. So you might have heard about JSPerf. So this is the website that uses benchmark.js.
Alex, if the de-optimized code is so much slower, why doesn't V8 just optimize all the code and use just optimized code? Why does it even bother with having slower code?
Well, so if you so if you run the code and there's an assumption is wrong, so you have to swap it with de-optimized code, right? I'm not really understanding the question right now. Could you rephrase it? Well,
why does Chrome have two forms of code? Why does it have a slow version and a fast version? Why doesn't it just have a fast code?
Well, like there are actually two compilers. Like that generates good code and then generates the faster one as it runs. So as it runs the code, it optimizes it. Like I feel like it's a tricky question. It looks smiley.
Tell us that.
Tell me.
He's throwing much more expensive than some JavaScript apps need to boot up fast. So some crappy code is meant to be generated very quickly. It does some optimizations, but it can't do all of them. Also, there's some optimizations that only matter, are only realized based on runtime usage.
Yeah, so basically there are two compilers. One is optimizing compiler, and then the other one, which is just runs, as Steph mentioned, just it generates good code, not best code. So the optimizing compiler runs or makes its assumptions well during the runtime, and it is an expensive operation. So couple of things. So benchmark.js. It's a library based on, it has precise timers, and it has different, well, I would say it has a combination of different benchmarking patterns. So the way you use benchmark.js, so you run, you can create the setup function or use setup function to basically for setup, like say the function that you're trying to benchmark, or like in this case, this is compare function, right? So setup is going to be executed only once before the loop, before benchmarking loop. So like the API is pretty straightforward. So you create a suite, and then you just create a benchmark and the benchmark code, and then you just run all the benchmarks. So the code that gets generated looks something like this. So here's your setup function with the compare, and then here's the loop, the while loop right there, which actually runs the function many times to get decent, reliable results. So I just want to finish off with a little demo here. Can you see it okay? Bigger. See this one? All right. So the benchmark you can write is actually really simple. I'm using I'm using D8. D8 is I guess the console version of V8. So I'm using benchmark.js. So here's the suite, and here's when you run it. And you have to you need to run the benchmarks using this D8 but with special command line flags. So you can say like D8 perf. Actually, you know what? Let's do that. D8 perf qtest. Right. So and it runs the benchmark, and as it runs benchmark, it's spitting out all the different flags and different information on what V8 is actually doing to your code. So at the very bottom, you can see like how many times benchmarks and how many operations per second it took. So it's not really helpful. It generates 2 files, but excuse me. So it generates 2 files, and those 2 files basically contain information that you can feed to this IR-Hydra tool. IR-Hydra is the tool that one of the engineers at Google wrote. So just hold on, I'm just trying to open them. Good burner. Yeah. Yeah, okay. There you go. So you basically, right. So it basically gives you all the functions that are there or got executed, and gives you a good sense of what. Just give me let's pick this one, right? It actually gives you information about the optimization. It's what actually happened, and it shows you why it happened. So tries to explain you that. This is a bailout when like this is the case where V8 has to just throw away the optimized code and replace the code with the optimized one. Yeah, so that's that. One other cool thing I can show you guys is this. So basically, if you run benchmarks using using Canary version of Chrome, and you feed the output to a like special tool called Tick processor, I think. You're gonna get this output, which basically tells you what was executing and how many ticks it took, and all that fun stuff. It actually will show you garbage collector work and C++ and all those things. So you can it's sort of similar to what Eric previously showed us, but kind of gives you greater the same information but in greater detail. And I think that's it. If you have any questions, just ping me or ask me.
Thank you. A couple of questions on benchmarks for Alex, right over here. Let me bring the mic over.
So you showed us a couple of bad ways to benchmark the converting a string to a number. What is the correct way to convert a string to a number and benchmark it?
Well, the point is that it's actually like it's a useless benchmark. It's called a micro benchmark. Like really simple operations is that what is it's something that V8 is really good at. It tries to speed up your code as much as it can. So like converting a string to a number doesn't make any sense. I mean, at the end of the day, it's the same thing, pretty much. So.
Cool. One more question, Venkat.
Hi, when do you profile your code versus using benchmarks?
Well, typically, so this particular case, what I was showing, it's more like on a computer side of things, right? So when you try to figure out how to speed up a particular part of your application, or not actually application, but the library, you might use a different data structure. And this particular thing, a particular way of running benchmarks is just sort of keeping you, make sure that you're sane, It's like, oh, I changed this thing. Is it actually speeding things up or not really? There are like different situations, but like this is really in the bowels of like V8 and how it treats the code when you're like using one thing, like you throw using like true or false will affect differently. It'll actually make V8 optimized code, and actually Steph can speak to that because I didn't actually dive into that. But anyway, profiling your code generally, what Eric showed is more of UI side of things. It's like, where do you spend your time? Why is it slow? Like, why is it rendering slow? Maybe like there's JavaScript execution going on, or like Ember run loops, right? Or I have like 3 run loops where I need just only one. So this is where you run the profile just to like high level figure out what's happening. And then if you really want to dive deep into that, you will use V8 or like benchmark like that.
Cool. And I've also seen benchmarks used successfully when, let's say you have an open source project or a library that's important to your company and you spend time optimizing something. Well, that performance was important enough to spend hours or days working on. How do you know that you're going to keep that up? How do you know somebody else isn't going to make a change that then is going to regress that, or the browser is going to change, and that's going to regress? And so having a repeatable benchmark is a way to kind of enforce, help you enforce those standards in your project. Yeah. Cool. Thanks a lot, Alex. Appreciate it. Cool. All right. So for those of you who have staying power, we're going to have some fun now with debugging, and I'm going to ask Stefan Penner to come up here, and he and I are going to take you on some debugging adventures and talk about the debugging mindset. Before Steph and I jump into our talk, I want to mention something I meant to mention earlier and I forgot. You guys know what the Webbies are? Everyone ever hear of the Webbies? It's an award. So this app called Gender Map was nominated for the Corporate Social Responsibility Webbie. This is by our friend Amit Schechter, who's going to be one of the speakers at the May meetup. And it's written in Ember, so we want it to win. So one more voting shill for you. I will, let me see, I'm going to tweet this URL out for us. Live tweet, here we go. Are you ready?
Is that an Ember?
Yeah, apparently.
Just D3? Oh, I didn't.
It's Ember, yeah. That's what Amit said. So either he's lying. Vote
I doubt he lied.
for the web. You know,
Turns out Ember can draw a whole bunch of little squares really well. This must be HTML bars to render that many squares on the screen.
Okay, cool. So anyway, this looks pretty, I have no idea what this is, but it looks pretty awesome. Okay, so we're going to jump right into it. I know it is getting late and people have places to be, things to do. And so we are going to talk debugging techniques for Ember.js development. That's Steph. I'm Luke. It's April 16th. We work for Yap Labs, which does Ember.js consulting and training. We've had the privilege of working with some of you who are in the room tonight, and would love to have the privilege of working with other of you as well. We're based mainly in New York. Our colleague Chris Selden is in Seattle. Chris and Steph are on the Ember core team, so we're heavily involved, invested, and big contributors to the framework as well as to the community. So if you have any your consulting and training needs, please get in touch. Another thing that we like besides Ember is longboarding. Steph got me into longboard skateboarding, and so if you ever want to skate, have a little Ember skate, maybe before our Ember train ride to Boston, we can pull that off, to let us know. Here's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to share N debugging techniques where N equals 6 or so.
And depends, it's a function that is based on the level of eyes glazed over in front of us.
Yes. And we're going to do it by example. So what we've done is Steph spent most of the night last night with a bunch of help from the open source community today building a brand new app, which you're going to see in a minute. An open source app that will both be useful to the community as well as be a great learning project. And then we went and we introduced bugs into it, each in its own GitHub branch for simplicity. And
as we were introducing them, I found a few, so I just left them in there.
So what we're going to do is we're going to go through one by one, and we're going to show you how to hunt the bugs and how to remove them. And then as we go, we can show you a bunch of cool debugging techniques, but the real hard part of debugging, as probably most of you in this room know, is the mindset, is how to think about the problem. And so we're going to try to communicate some of that stuff as well. It's certainly the hardest to learn, but the most valuable. So, the debugging mindset. Anybody know what this says? Any Greek speakers in the room? Readers? All right, it's a quote from Archimedes. And now some of you probably know. The quote is, "Give me a place to stand, and with a lever I will move the whole world." And I thought about this when we were thinking about the debugging mindset because of something Steph said to me when we were talking yesterday. He said, I think you said, you have to find something that you know, something you can latch onto to kind of start the debugging process. And I think that's a lot of is the mindset. The lever I think about are the techniques that we'll show you, but the figuring out where to stand so you can use this lever is a lot of the mindset. And so hopefully we'll we'll see in Ember how you can use the tools and your knowledge about the framework to figure out where that place to stand is and to dig in. So a theme of, as we go through each of these examples, is establishing the facts. This is a big part of I think, the mindset. You want to take us through these guys? What's the most important thing to do when you run into an error?
Well, first you have to be aware that there's an error. So it's very important as a developer to be running with all your senses aware, your debug console open. Sometimes errors will appear just as little red dots, and you have to figure that out. But
Yep.
I don't know, just like keep your senses aware. Another thing is like once you do run into a problem, you need to get a firm understanding of what you do believe to be true and what you think is wrong. And the first thing you should do is you should validate what you think is working correctly and make sure that it actually is. So if you think, well, it can't be X, apply the scientific method and try to disprove yourself first. Because the worst thing you can do is actually start debugging and actually realize it is the thing that you thought was not the problem. So
Who is that? Has that happened to anybody?
and everyone else that didn't put up their hand, they're lying.
Will.
No, they're just lying. Or they haven't fixed that bug yet. So that's absolutely important. If you think something is true, prove it's true, and then you have that firm place to stand on in order to solve the hopefully now simple problem.
Yeah. And
The next part is isolation. Especially with Ember, if you are going to try to debug all of Ember to solve your one problem, you're going to have a very bad time. The key point is to try and isolate this problem from your application. So if you can't solve it really quick in your application, try to replicate it in a JS bin. The benefit of this is if it actually turns out to be a bug, you can just share that JS bin and hopefully someone else will fix it for you. And if it doesn't seem to be a bug in that JS bin, maybe it's something entirely different. So continue to add stuff to that JS bin until it explodes. So if your app that is 10 pieces and you have the JS bin that's one, keep adding a little bit more to one and removing from another until you hit that parity. And hopefully that will give you a good point of reference to really start digging into what the problem is.
it's also a great way to get help too. Another question for the group: who has helped somebody on Twitter or IRC through a JS bin? Raise your hand. So when I look around, I see some of the most experienced Ember developers in the room are raising their hand. That's who's willing to help if you've done the work to simplify. People will just jump in and help you overcome what's blocking you. So this is along the lines of what Steph was just saying, a Sherlock Holmes quote: "Never theorize before you have data. Invariably, you end up twisting facts to suit theories instead of theories to suit facts."
So Alex's little talk about the performance stuff, this is the same for debugging problems as it is for debugging performance problems. As Alex knows, and as I know, and probably other people here, is often that performance thing might not be the thing you expect it to do. It turns out V8 has bugs. Browsers have bugs. And sometimes you think the thing that should be fast is actually slow, and it's prove yourself wrong or prove yourself right first before you go on.
Yep. Cool. So it's live debugging time.
This is much better than live coding because you expect everything to go wrong, and that's the point. So you can't actually do live debugging wrong.
So I have a repo here that I checked out from Stefan Penner. Is this open source yet?
I just made it open source. So if you guys might have noticed earlier this week, Ember got a job board, jobs.ember.js.com. And I saw this and I was like, this app is slow and it's not an Ember app.
It's also a little ugly.
It's kind of ugly. And I figured, we have a community of web developers and designers and hybrids of both. We can do a little bit better than this. This, really, I don't think is something I'm very proud of. So I figured, hey, let's see what we can do. And I posted a message on Twitter yesterday. Hey, a vague open source project, any designer to give me help? Within like 3 or 4 minutes, I had 4 people message me. And then over the course of the night, 4 or 5 more people message me. And 2 of them have been trucking away at some good design work and today implementing the design work. So we're on the way to create an Ember.js-based job board. It's open source now at stefanpenner/ember-jobs. Jump in, fix bugs, make it work.
Add features.
Add features, break a few things maybe. Well, you just saw it. It's ugly, and that's why we're making a new one that isn't ugly. And that is Ember. It's quick, right? All of the money we end up making because of the job board just goes back into Ember itself. So funding stickers and conference stuff and support of meetups. So if you guys want to help out, it's a good cause, and it's going to be open source and a good non-trivial open source app that we're going to keep maintain. So it'll be a good place to learn.
Cool. So I went through these steps in the README. If you check out this project and want to follow along or want to check this out later, check the README for these steps. It relies on master version of Ember CLI, so you're going to want to check out that and do that. Do people know what Ember CLI is? Raise your hand if you haven't heard of Ember CLI. I tricked you. If you haven't heard of it, raise your hand. Okay, so a few people want to give a quick summary of.
As you're installing it, yeah.
Cool. I've already done this.
Wait, Ember CLI? Would be nice if everyone could share the same build tooling to make you just productive building your app rather than you doing it yourself. It turns out build tooling is a little bit difficult. There's a lot of hard problems that people glaze over. It'd be good if we just had something that worked all the time, worked well. That's Ember CLI. It's currently pre-alpha, but there's a bunch of people using it already, which is pretty cool. We're hoping to get another release out by the end of the week.
So this is a little bit of what Ember CLI does. You can build your Ember app, use generators, create new kind of Ember app directories real quick, and then run a server for development.
Where it differs from other build systems like Yeoman or Ember AppKit, which preceded it, is build performance and build stability. So it has a dedicated build pipeline, which is called Broccoli, built by Joe Liz, and it focuses on accuracy and performance rather than performance and brittle builds. So you can get checked out, you can change branches, and your app won't break. You can remove files, add files, and what you see in your browser will always be a correct manifestation of what is on your disk, which is quite important.
So, guess I need to install again.
Dum dum dum.
Debugging time. So we can't find module broccoli sass. I think that I would need to do npm install. Yep. Oops. Nope, that was good enough. I missed an L. So we've had up until the last minute. Our friend Nick has been working on the front end, the visual kind of piece of this. Okay, so I've got the app, the server process running. So I'm going to try to bring this up in a browser. Is it supposed to do that? What? This is the white screen missing dep branch.
Looks like our designer fixed the bug. So,
do you want to try a different one?
Yeah, jump to the next one.
Okay.
Hopefully they're not all fixed. One quick second. It'll be a short talk.
It's like the opposite of problems we usually have in talks.
Yeah, missing export will work.
Okay.
I shouldn't call it what it is.
So we're going to boot this guy up again. And refresh. So this is actually good because we're going to spin this into a positive. You can see what the app is supposed to look like. Here we go, and I will just give you a quick tour so I can tap in here.
It's a little bit nicer than what we saw before.
Oh yeah, anyone like this design?
Needs a little bit of work still, but it's coming. It's not bad since I started it yesterday.
So if I want to see openings at Nest, I can start typing Nest, read live filter. If I want to see stuff just in Palo Alto, I can spell it correctly, and we're good.
So if there's 1,000 jobs at $149 a job, we will make this much faster and better. So I'm not terribly worried. Assuming we're going to have 10 or 20 on there, it seems like this will be fine. Probably even up to 100, this will be fine.
And this filter is going to be styled.
I, in fact, know a few developers. We can probably make it scale if, in fact, we have that many jobs.
And then you can dig into a detail view, see the long description for a job. So that's generally how it's supposed to work. So now I'm going to refresh. And has anyone ever had this experience with an Ember app? Yeah.
I know, it looks like a pretty awesome Ember app to me.
So
There's nothing wrong with it.
right.
It's very fast.
Yeah, very quick.
Kind of like Emperor's New Robes. This is the best Ember app I've ever seen. Don't you agree?
WSOD, white screen of death. In this case, it's sort of an off-white screen of death because we have a little CSS loading at least. So I'm violating the first rule that Steph told us about before, which is that I'm running my Ember app in development without my inspector open. So I have no idea what's going on. So there's a few ways to open it. I usually just right-click and say inspect element, and that's going to open this up. And lo and behold, we have an error message.
So hilariously, as I was going through the prep for this talk, all of these bugs that I'm like, oh, yeah, this always hits me. I realized that we spent a lot of time giving good error messages for. So this is good.
So
you have to do one less thing. Keep your development console open, and a whole class of bugs will give you pretty freaking descriptive reasons as to what's going on here.
So in this case, Ember's telling me in this error message, error while loading route index, expected to find controller index within Ember jobs controllers index, but got undefined. Did you forget export default? So this is about as easy as debugging gets, I think, at least. So I'm going to go ahead and go to this file.
So this is also an Ember CLI specific error we can give you. One of the goals with CLI is not just the build tools, but to provide a sort of convention-packed way of building an Ember app. This lets us detect errors much sooner, detect them by convention, and we're just kind of scratching the surface with what we can do.
So for those of you who haven't had experience with an ES6, with an app that's using ES6 modules, which Ember App Kit and Ember CLI does, most of the modules in this are going to specify what is the object that's exported from them. And when we look at this index controller file, we notice somebody forgot to export anything, right? There's nothing at the top, and there's nothing at the bottom, and there's nothing in the middle. So what I'm going to try doing is I'm going to try typing export default, and I'll save that.
We also didn't make up this module syntax. This is what's going to be included in the browsers and included in the new versions of JavaScript. So we're not just crazy and made it up all by ourselves.
So if I come back to here, get rid of that for a minute. If I come back to here, you notice I didn't even refresh the page. It's because Ember CLI integrates live reload. And so as soon as I saved that file, it recompiled and refreshed the page for me, which is pretty cool. And my WSOD is gone. My white screen death is gone, and the app works again.
As Dennis would say, it's faster than CSS.
So that was pretty cool. Again, pretty straightforward. Ember helped us out a lot. Let's see if we can get something a little more challenging. That's our next. All right, so go pull this one up. Oops. Let me discard that change. Branch. Pull.
So while Luke's doing that, I would definitely encourage you guys to poke around with this app. There's some rough edges. There's definitely lots of things that aren't implemented yet. It's using Firebase for persistence, and it does have a relatively good test suite, so it's a good place to look for a place to learn and a place to help out. So
this doesn't quite qualify as the white screen of death because I have the word loading on my screen as I try to boot this thing. And I have an error message. So this is an interesting one. Starting rule 1, read the error message. Error while loading route index, no model was found for company, spelled with an IE.
So Luke, what if I want to find code in this tool here? Who here has this editor, has the debug tooling open on a regular basis? Who here doesn't have this open on a regular basis? Everyone's comfortable? We're good? All right.
Okay, well, yeah, so what I could do is I can use the code search that's built into Chrome. There's 2 ways to get to it. I can go to this tab right here that says search. And by the way, this bottom section, if you not familiar how to get it to show up, this little icon right here collapses and shows that. You can also use the escape key as a shortcut. And that works on any tab that you're over here. And so the search tab is going to let me search for anything. So I could search for company, enter, and then find a few. I also bring this up from wherever I am by using the keyboard shortcut Command Option. No, is it Command Option F? Yes. And hit that. And so right away, I'm seeing in the search results here, this DS belongs to company. And unless it's some sort of French or foreign language thing, I'm pretty sure there's something wrong here. So, so now that I see this, I'm going to go and figure out where is this. Just click on it where?
Just click on it right in the search.
Oh yeah, so I clicked on it in the search, it brought it up in my...
If you see here, whoa, look at this. My goodness, it's in the jobs.js file in the module folder.
Yes. So let's go there, huh? Pop over here, jobs.js. I got a lot of temp stuff in here. I need to improve my... Here, we'll just navigate. Normally, I like to use a Sublime project for this kind of thing. Okay, so here's my my DS model extension, my job model, and it's saying that it's a company is defined as belongs to company. So this is either, I'm going to guess, either going to be companies, plural, or company with a Y, right? One of those has got to be more right than this.
But as it turns out with Ember data, it's always singular. Every full name you give something in Ember is supposed to be singular.
Cool, so let's go with that. We'll hit save and come back over here. Looks like it's reloading. Let's see what happens.
I think we're done, right? It's good.
I hope so. Well, it says establishing secure connection.
All right, well, let's open up that console again and see what's going on here.
So I'm going to stop it and hit refresh.
Oh, look, there we go. We got a...
Oh.
We were stuck on a debugger, I think.
Interesting. Okay, so I have sort of I have more stuff rendered, but I have an error. So let's see what's going on here. First rule, read the error message. Okay, error loading route index. This index route seems to be having a lot of trouble for us. It says needs controller session, but it could not be found.
I think there's an extra S in that session.
Session. Yes, okay. So let's come over to our index route, and sure enough, we see the extra S here. So far, I would say the secret of debugging based on what we've seen so far is reading the error message.
And knowing where to find what you're looking for. So putting your files in good places means your other coworkers will be happier when they have bugs because they'll be able to find the place where you introduce the problem.
Steph, is every problem that you run into with Ember this easy?
Yes.
Okay. Let's grab the next one here.
That's it, guys. You guys now know how to debug Ember apps. You're good to go.
Okay, so let's refresh and see what the fates have in store. Steph.
Who here has seen this one?
It's a white screen of death.
White screen of death? No errors. Alex, what's the problem here?
So Alex said promises, for those of you who didn't hear.
All right, who here? Remember what Alex said.
All right, so let's see. Where am I going to start? Well,
you call Yap Labs. We're going to come and fix this for you.
Well, I will say one of the things that we have to do at Yap a lot is to jump into apps whose code base we've never seen before and solve some gnarly problem. So we have gotten pretty good at these tools. And one of the things that I know right away is that when you have an error that doesn't seem to manifest itself, but clearly something is broken, there is most likely there is an error happening somewhere that's getting swallowed. And that's what Alex was alluding to, is that in the case of a promise, there might be an exception thrown that is swallowed by, because there's no rejection handler. So the easiest thing to use is to look on your sources tab. What's that? So okay, so let's take a look. So we heard a suggestion for Ember Inspector promises. Take a quick look at that. You need to reload the page to see promises created before you open the inspector. I can do that. And then, yeah, great. So good question. So for folks who haven't seen the Ember Inspector, it's a Chrome extension. It also works with Firefox, and it is awesome. It lets you see views.
It's also an Ember app. So it's an Ember app to debug your Ember apps.
Views visible here. It's giving. They give it away. Well, so Ember Inspector was so powerful, it actually found the bug by accident. But
So if
that
we go
wasn't
back to
the design of the
promises-
presentation.
If you go back to promises,
Yes. So we see that there is a rejection, and in fact, this also points us at the bug. Also not the plan that we had, but this turns out that if you were to open Ember Inspector, as you suggested, you would find the source of the issue pretty quickly. So good idea. We're going to show another approach to tackling this. Let me refresh and not have my source file pointing to that. So one of the useful things is understanding how the Sources tab works, particularly around dealing with exceptions. So this little button right here lets me decide whether I want to pause on exceptions or not. And when it's enabled, which means when it's colored, when it's blue, it also gives me this other option, which is pause on caught exceptions. So when an exception happens oh yeah, sorry about that.
this is also Chrome Canary. I'm not sure if this is in the stable channel yet. But rather than having multiple shades of this button, which is very bad for people who are colorblind, they have split it into two.
Yep, I'm in Chrome Dev Channel right now, so it's at least made it to Dev Channel. So exceptions can either be caught and handled by some code that's run, some JavaScript code, or they can be uncaught, in which case they bubble all the way up. And by default, this check mark is unchecked. It's only going to give you a breakpoint on uncaught exceptions, because there's perfectly valid reasons when an exception might be thrown and you want your code to catch it and handle it. In fact, if you're running an app that has jQuery loaded, every time you boot your app, this will occur. So if I turn this check mark on and I refresh, now I'm going to break a few times. And you may have experienced this if you work with Ember apps. The first breaks, the first places that you hit when you have this enabled are not what you're looking for. There are things that just, exceptions that are thrown and caught in jQuery in particular, and sometimes in Ember.
You get used to them. You're like, oh yeah, I remember that one.
Yep. So, and then this is in Ember. This is a fix for a Safari bug.
While we're talking about fun bugs, that was the most ridiculous. There's a big bug in Safari, in older Safaris, where if an error was thrown in a finally block, it would execute your finally block again without throwing the error the second time, which was a solid weekend of debugging, which was...
So when I continued past that error, which again is one of the expected exceptions that are thrown, I came across this line of code, which is not valid JavaScript, and clearly a problem just from reading it. But the thing that, and I have two conclusions here, in looking at this. One is, what the hell was Steph thinking, putting this in?
It's for perf.
And the second is, what the hell is wrong with Ember that there was no error here, right? So there are two bugs. There's a bug that me or my coworker introduced into this app that we need to deal with. But then if you want to be a good community member, there's also a bug in Ember that we want to deal with.
That Alex introduced.
So let's take a look at the Ember one first. One of the things to get familiar with in this Sources tab is on the right here we have this call stack. And a call stack is kind of the set of
This
methods.
is where you are.
Yep.
And that's where you're not, but where you were.
This is where you came from, what called you. And so this is clearly an error. And so something that wraps this call has a catch and is swallowing this error so that it never gets bubbled up. The first thing that I would try doing probably is I would try starting to look through this stack trace.
Oh, whoa, what is that?
Well, yeah, I usually gloss over this apply and super wrapper. I hit it a lot in Ember.
So the apply thing is for perf. And Luke, do you want to tell us what the super wrapper is and how can we just...
Sure. So super, as you're familiar with, the Ember object model uses kind of a classical OO inheritance model, where in a given method you can call super and invoke the parent class's implementation of that method. Now it turns out that JavaScript is not a classical OO language. It uses prototypal inheritance, and there is no concept of super, particularly in JavaScript. So the Ember object model needs to be implemented in JavaScript. And what you're looking at here is the implementation that allows that to happen. If you want to go deep into this topic, Mixonic, Matt over here, has spent many an hour digging into this aspect of the code base, and I'm sure I'd be happy to chat with you.
The quick rule of thumb is, all you care about is this apply. The rest of this is just doing the super stuff. This is the thing that actually runs code.
Yep.
When you see this, you can ignore everything but the apply and step into the apply with your debugger.
Totally. And so I usually, if I'm looking through a call stack like this, I'm going to gloss over that.
What type of things in the call stack do you usually look for?
Well, I always look for my own app code.
What does that look like?
Well, a lot of times...
How can I see what it would look like?
If you look on the right, you see the file name that the method appears in. If it says Ember.js, it's not your app code.
So what you're saying is you look for your app code first,
yes.
And then you look for framework
Well,
code.
usually I assume that it was my problem.
So is there any other your app code in here?
Well, I see this one right here at the top.
And let's
just
scroll
take
down.
A quick scroll through. No, I see jQuery and Ember.
Okay.
So this and
Looks like a lot of stacks, though. How can we jump through this a little bit quicker to find the root cause?
That's a good point. I don't know if these people have the patience for me to look through
I
every
don't.
level here. Well, what we could do is if I keep stepping, right now I'm at a breakpoint up here where the syntax error is. If I tell the debugger to step from here, it's going to continue with execution, and if my theory is right, I'm going to be inside of a catch pretty soon, and then know maybe what that incorrect behavior is. So let's try that. These are my controls right here. For those of you who want to know what these icons mean, this is continue. This is step over, which means if there's a function call, you're not going to descend into it. You're just going to step right over it. This is step into. If the next line is just a expression or a statement, it's going to go to it. If you're going to go into a function, it would descend into it. This is step out. This is deactivate breakpoints as you're running. So I'm just going to use this step into. And so the first place I end up is a finally. And for you may or may not know that the basic structure of exception handling uses try catch finally. Finally is guaranteed to run whether code path failed or succeeded. Catch will try, the stuff inside of try will run until there's an exception, or all the way if there's none, and the stuff inside of catch will only run if there's an exception. So this is a try finally. I know this is not my culprit because there's no catch. A finally is not going to, it's impossible for a finally to swallow an exception as far as I know. So I'm going to keep stepping. Now, here's a catch, and it's in Ember. It's in router.transition by intent.
Alex, where's the promise here?
So it seems like we caught. No, this was an accident, but it has that side bonus.
No, this is just to make you feel bad. This is payback for the Promise movie.
Yes.
As it turns out in Ember, you will not have uncaught exceptions with promises anymore. We alert you to every possible one of them now. It is impossible to run into that problem. But the router will still swallow some of your things, or your own code will still swallow some errors if you try catch.
So it certainly seems to me that this is catching errors indiscriminately and creating a new transition. Now, I'm going to, when I scroll up here at the beginning of this function, I also have a clue from a comment. Can't always trust comments, they can lie. But in this case it says, this doesn't really belong here, but here it shall remain until our ES6 transpiler can handle cyclical dependencies. So without even looking at the history of this part of Ember, I know from kind of following the project that ES6 is relatively new changes, and places where there's relatively new changes are often where bugs are. So I think I'm probably on the right track and probably have enough information at this point to create an isolated test case that I can open a bug with.
That brings up another good point. If you are totally lost what the problem is, it's very likely that the problem was something introduced relatively recently. It's almost always the case. Very rarely is it something that's very old. So if you look back in your Git log and you see, Luke wrote some code, you might be like, well, I'm going to look at Luke's code because I don't trust what he did. And
yeah, and that brings us to two interesting points, I think. The first is I want to get back to, since I proceeded, I want to get back to where the syntax error was in the app so I can fix it. And if I refresh now, I'm at this same annoying jQuery thing. So it would be really nice if I did not have to deal with this every time. And so there's a few ways to deal with this, but one of the tricks that we like to do here is to just go into our, where we're implementing our application and add a ready hook. And when does the ready hook fire stuff?
Dennis, when does the ready hook fire?
This is like who's buried in Grant's tomb, come on.
It fires on jQuery ready. It is basically the same. It is slightly after jQuery says the document is ready.
The nice thing is that that is after all of these other things that we hit.
All of jQuery's feature detection and Ember's feature detection.
So I can turn off pause and caught exceptions, refresh, and then I'm going to go immediately to that debugger, at which point I can then turn on pause and caught exceptions and continue.
This is a good strategy, not just with ready, but if you are in a scenario where you think you're swallowing exceptions, put a debugger just before you enter that scenario, and then enable the uncaught exception before you click the button that seems to be doing nothing. And this is a great way to quickly see what's going on without having to go through a bunch of noise. This also works really well in testing, because it turns out jQuery uses thrown exceptions to do crazy stuff, and it's a disaster.
Another useful thing, this pattern of actually putting the word debugger, which creates a breakpoint, is useful, but it can be a little bit annoying because there's no way to not stop at this debugger. And so more typically, we would do something where we would actually just put the debugger here in, actually I'm going to show you another shortcut. If I hit Command O while focused in here, I'm going to be able to jump around to particular files in my source map. So we can go ahead and put a breakpoint here and refresh. Now one of the things that we'll notice, I've got on again, one of the things that we'll notice is that even though I tried to put the breakpoint there on line 14, it kind of moved it down on me. You can't break on a line that has no executable code in Chrome, so if you try to click something and it ends up on the next line, that's often what's happening. And so, now that I have a breakpoint here, I have the advantage of being able to enable and disable it. So disabling a breakpoint is in two ways. You can uncheck this box here, or you can right-click and say disable breakpoint and continue. One other kind of useful technique here is around conditional breakpoints. And so if I say edit breakpoint, the breakpoint on line 13 will stop only if this expression is true. There's, I don't know what a good example might be here, but
sometimes you only want to break when you hit a counter of 5, or when, for example, the DS record's full name is foo. Basically, you only want to pause in one of the many times your program executes through this particular sequence, and this is quite practical. You can also do crazy stuff like actually running your own code, like console logs or like running extra stuff. It's kind of crazy, but it's possible.
Let's see if this works. So I said a conditional breakpoint if hello, I think what did I say? Hello is in my href. So let's say if I say question mark hello. Didn't do it.
Let's move on.
All right. So the next bit just that I want to say is that if I saw this in my code base, I think it was I am syntax error, one of the things I would want to know is what the hell was this doing here? And so a really useful tool in this situation is git blame, and a really useful way to use git blame is in GitHub if your code's in GitHub. So I have command / bound to pop up this file in GitHub, and then when I see it highlighted, the line number I was on, I can say blame, and I can see what commit introduced this particular line of code. And I can see it was by Steph, and the text was introduced bug, and well, that explains it. Cool. All right, so let's hit the next challenge here. Whoops. There we go. All right, let's see what we're in for. Well, this looks pretty good. So what was the bug report on this one, Steph?
You know, something about the search thing not working properly all the time. Not just that the drop down is off to the left, that's being worked on right now, but
Let's see if we can play around with it and see what's going on. So this kind of brings up an interesting question of what do you do if you can't reproduce a bug? Right?
works on my machine.
Yep. Close it. Move on.
So put some text in there.
Right in this box here.
Yeah.
Okay. So.
And then go to the top debugger there. I mean, not top, the top drop-down entry.
Yeah. Oh, all job types. Okay.
Oh, what happened there? Why did?
Oh yeah. Wait, that's wrong.
What?
So I'm filtered to Yahoo in theory, but I'm seeing nest jobs. So I think we've reproduced our bug.
I think we have as well. So as it turns out, there's some very easy bugs, syntax errors, this and that, but often the bugs are algorithmic. So an algorithm that you didn't write yourself, you might not understand exactly how it works. Again, what did we talk about earlier? What were some of the tips we gave?
Well, we should kind of try to establish what do we know.
What do we know?
So
we know most of this works, right?
Right.
There's just one edge case where it doesn't work.
So I think probably a good technique would be to try to localize where in the code this is happening. And I don't really know this app that well, so I'm going to use the Ember inspector. And this little magnifying glass lets me kind of narrow in on different sections of the UI.
Who here knows who Zed Shaw is? So Zed Shaw has one rant that he rants about once in a while. He has a theory that nearly all bugs and algorithms exist in one type of code construct. Does anyone know what that is?
Conditionals.
Conditionals, branching. So
There's actually a rich field, a rich area of computer science. People have heard of cyclomatic complexity and function point counting and stuff. And that's basically that theory, right? Saying the more branches there are in code, the more likely there is to be negative bed quality.
So let's find where this algorithm happens, and let's look for branches, because it's very, very likely that it works in most cases. There's a scenario in this branch that is not working correctly.
So I use this little magnifying glass to kind of narrow in, and then I'm looking at my view tree. I'm saying, okay, the section that has the content that's wrong is this array section, and then it's inside of the index controller. So I'm going to just take a stab and.
Well, we see that it's in an inline template. So let's go to the concrete template, the index template,
Good call.
and see what's going on there.
Yep, that's just what I was going to say. Index.hbs. Okay, here we go. So it looks like we've got a title, a partial, render jobs filtered. So filtered is a clue because what's broken is filtering.
Yeah, filtering is broken.
And
And where is filter? Because we want to know where this code's written, right? So it's going to be a property on whatever the current controller is, and the inspector told us it is the index controller. So let's jump over to the index controller.
So one of the useful things here is like good searching techniques. So one of the things that I know that almost definitely there is going to be a controller. It's probably index controller, but somebody might have moved stuff around. But there's going to be a property named filtered, and it's going to have a colon after it, right, as part of its definition. So if I now search for filtered colon, it's a pretty good chance I'm going to hit this, and it's the only thing in the code base that I hit. Although it does have an underscore in front of it, which is surprising to me. I see. So we're setting filtered up here, and
This looks pretty complicated.
it sure does. Can't we use I don't know, a computed macro, array computed macro for something like this?
Filter one isn't complete yet.
All right, so I got to start to get my head around this if I'm going to be able to debug it.
Or we can cheat. We can just take a guess and basically say, Let's assume the branching is the thing that's wrong, because branching is almost always wrong.
All right, well, why don't we put a breakpoint and see what does the world look like kind of when we get here and we have our problem.
Sounds good. So let's find it in the Chrome inspector and add a
Right.
breakpoint.
So I can say, I know this file name is index.js under controller, so I can say commando, whoops, nope. Yep, there we go, commando.
So Command O will do a file search, and because we use some source maps, you can search by files in your project. Command Shift O will search for functions in the file.
And yep, sure enough, there's that code that we were just looking at in my editor. So I wanted to just put a breakpoint right
Oh,
here.
well, while we're here, we're going to want to look at a few of these properties, like what the decision-making properties are, query and type. I don't want to type them every time, so is there a way for the Chrome inspector to...
It sounds like you're talking about watch expression stuff.
Oh, look at that.
So this watch expression section will continually show you the value of a particular variable, regardless of context, just kind of based on the name that you put in here. So if I say query, it's going to show me that, well, so far there is no query in my current scope.
Let's add type to that too quickly.
Sure, let's put type in. One nice thing sometimes to have, whoops, that's not what I wanted. One nice thing to have in here sometimes is, oh man. There we go. A nice thing is to have this in there, because there's always a this.
And arguments.
And arguments can be interesting too.
You can also expand it. Now, this is very useless to expand, but if you leave it expanded as you navigate, it'll stay expanded.
Yep. So let's, now that we've got this, I'm going to go back into, let's close this Ember inspector view, and I'm going to just remove one character, which if my theory is right, is going to try to activate this filter code and hit our breakpoint. Yes, okay, we're on the right track. So that was a moment, by the way, right there, where you're testing your assumption, right? I had this theory that the code that we were looking at was related to when I was typing into this field and filtering these values. And right there was just a validation that, yes, I'm on the right track. So it's a small thing, but something to remember. So it looks like my query is what's in my text field, Yahoo right now. Type is undefined, so that right away jumps out at me as like, that could be an issue.
Alex, why is type undefined here? I think it's coming from query params. Actually, I think this is Ember select. Who here has an Ember select bug?
Also notice that type is not just undefined, it's the string undefined.
I think it's both query params and Ember select both fighting right now.
So that's my first theory is what I'm going to now do is I'm going to look at this code and I'm going to ask myself, well, what does it mean if type is undefined? What is going to happen here? And what's the intention? So it looks like this code is saying if the query is blank and the type is blank, then just return everything. Now my query is certainly not blank, and I don't want everything returned. My type should be blank because I have all job types here, but it's not. It's the string undefined. And so that sounds like it could be a bug, but then I continue reading and I say, or type is undefined. So it seems like somebody's already worked around this bug. That is my theory. So if I hit the...
let's see what the whole expression equates to. So if
that's
you
a
actually
great idea.
select from here to here and mouse over it, the Chrome dev channel, at least Canary, will show you the expression. Okay, so you can select the sub-expression that you want.
So that's true. That means it's going to go into the true part of the branch and it's going to return everything, but that's totally not what we want.
No.
Okay. So what is wrong here? Let's see. So why is this true? Is the first part true? Let's check that. Select that and hover over. The first part is false. And so the second part, where it's saying that the type is equal to undefined, is true. So that certainly doesn't seem right to me, because if the type is undefined, type is the word string undefined, but we do have a query, we want to use that query, right? So I think my theory right now is if I ensure that, if I make sure that if I don't go into this true branch if there is a query, then we will avoid this bug. So let's pop over here. And I'm going to say if query, let's see, if the query is blank, or, is this right?
Friends around the last two. You want them to
Let's
equate
try this
together.
guy. All right, good point. So there's two options where type might be considered empty. Either it's blank or it is this awkward string undefined thing. So if we combine those into one expression, then this whole thing should make more sense.
So Luke, why is that type even here? Why is this hack here?
Well, I don't know. I would probably check git blame and then find out who put it there.
Yeah, so just being nice to your fellow coworkers, put a comment. If you're working around something, just put a comment. I'm working around X, and hopefully point to a GitHub issue so that when it does get fixed, you can go in and remove it.
So you mean something like this, like yo, like that?
And a link to the GitHub issue, I think. I mean, that's enough to say that this was intentionally something crappy, but link to the GitHub issue if there is one.
Got it. All right, so let's refresh this.
Use git.io.
The question, just for those
Git.io will.
For people following along at home that didn't hear that question, the question was: is it okay to use a tiny or shortened URL in your code comment from a service that will likely disappear? Probably not a good idea.
Use git.io.
Cool.
GitHub service that will shorten.
So I'm going to right now disable this breakpoint. I may need it back, and let this run, and then see if we can reproduce our problem. So I think I got here by going to full time and then back, and then typing, and well, it's not the same problem. I'll give you that.
We have made another problem.
So we certainly changed something. So now I'm going to re-enable this breakpoint and see if we can figure out now what's going on. So I'll just change one character. Here we are at our breakpoint. And now my hope is that we're not going into this true branch, and I'm pretty sure we're not because we didn't see all the results anymore. So let's step over. Sure enough, I'm in the else. And so now let's see what this part of the code is doing. And one of the things that you'll notice is that while we were working on that other part, I didn't worry about this other part of the code at all. One of a really valuable tool is to be able to kind of like filter out everything in a code base and kind of treat it as a black box while you're working on one section. And then do the same, once you've established the behavior of one section, then say, okay, I'm now going to treat that one as a black box and focus in on this other area. Because the human brain can only hold so much, at least my brain can only hold so much. So we're in this else branch, and we are going to run a filter on this array, and then run a second filter on the array. So I'd like to see, I think, what the intermediate value is between these two. So what I'm going to do here is grab this much code and pop my console open down here, paste it, and run. It's a filter. It's coming back as an empty array. So this first section is filtering out everything, which means that this second section doesn't hold any hope of being correct because there's nothing left to filter. And so now that I've established that, again, I haven't even really looked at the value in there. Question? The question is there a reason why the author of this code did not use a single filter and instead is using two filters?
So
I don't know. The author of this code?
Yeah, so if you look at a new version on GitHub, it doesn't have this because if you, it turns out when you make more complicated expressions than you need to, you introduce bugs.
Good point.
So making it a single expression turns out to make it much simpler, and the bug may or may not go away.
So again, what I just did is I just ran this function without thinking at all about what the contents of this code was. My hope is always not to have to figure out something, right? I'm kind of being lazy, but it's saving me brain cells and letting me focus on one thing at a time. But now I've narrowed down the problem into something inside of this filter function. And so we can take advantage of that to now dig in, forget about the rest of the world, and figure out what's going on right here. And in particular, I can take one, I know that everything is being filtered out. I can take one example and figure out, and try to figure out why it's being filtered out in isolation. And so by one way to do that is I could say model.object at 0. And so I've got a single object, and looking at a single job, and I'm going to assign that here in the console to a variable called job, just to make it easy to work with. It also happens to match the code that's in here, so that helps me mentally think about it. And if I say now job.getType, like this code does, I can get a sense, okay, so this is full time. Now we're going to be comparing that to type that is that's coming in from outside of this method, and that value, the string undefined. So that bug, while it was partially worked around above, obviously the person didn't catch this section, and so we need to accommodate that here as well. So what we can do now is come back here and say if type and type is not equal to undefined, then my theory is this should fix the problem. Now again, I would not hold this up as great code. I would want to dig in to figure out why the hell is type coming in as a string undefined.
The important part is most of the time your bugs are working around problems because you are now in a world where you're like hack, and you will break everything.
So I also when I'm trying to test the theory of a bug, I'm not worrying so much about the elegance of my solution as I am about validating whether my theory is correct. Once I have a working solution, I can then say, okay, now how can we improve this step by step where each step is safe and keeping us in a working state. So let's come back and refresh here. Let this run. We'll get to, I'm going to disable this for a second. We'll go back to get to our messed up state where we select something, go back, and now this filtering seems to be, yeah, I see nest. I see two nests, which is right. If I take everything out, I see all three records. If I say Yahoo, all right, so now we seem to be in a working state, and I would, I might at this point call the person over who reported the bug and say, hey, does this seem to be behavior you expect as well? And then I would come back to this code and start to ask myself, okay, so what could we do that's a little bit cleaner here? One thing would be maybe like right as soon as we bring this into our world, this type thing, to say if type is this string undefined, then type equals, can you do that?
Yep.
Assign it to undefined. Then I can get rid of this.
It doesn't matter. No one does that, and if they do, they deserve to be shot.
You got bigger problems.
Yes.
I can get rid of that.
Well, you can always do void 0, which can't be redefined, but then you look like a.
And then I can refresh and validate that I didn't break stuff. It's all job types. Yahoo, everything, nest. Looks pretty good. Cool. Do we have one more, Steph?
I think if you guys have questions, ask away. Otherwise, we can go to our after party thingamajigger.
Was that helpful to folks? Cool. Does anybody have an ultimate debugging tip that they would like to share with the group? If not, we have one quick demo that Matt's going to show us, and then we're going to go to the bar and drink or talk. Go ahead.
Could you quickly take one of your earlier errors and reproduce them, like get rid of an export or something?
Sure.
So you get a white screen of death?
Yes. That a good one was, let's see, typo in full name.
I think this would be quick.
Cool.
One with or without an error?
With an error, white screen.
I think this is a white screener. Let me verify.
Refresh it again. You're good to go.
Okay.
It corrects the race.
Is this white screen enough for you?
That's good.
Cool.
All right. So if
I can do this quickly, I also need to be able to make the change to the code. Is that here?
Yeah, it's still done.
All right, so there's this concept of loading and error substates. You're seeing the loading thing, presumably, because you see that loading ... And so if you have, let's see, new file, error.hbs, and say there was an error, and save it.
Oh, live reload. There you go.
He knows. Exactly. Come on, what do you think I'm here for?
Stop.
All right. So one of the nice things about this error substate is, well, first of all, just by putting error.handlebars in your templates, you basically opted into this error substate. So if you're transitioning into a route and an error is thrown in the course, that transition is going to look for this error substate to automatically enter, which is why this, oops, I don't know how this works.
It's live reload.
And live save from Sublime Text.
Oh, yeah.
So basically, you can transition into this error state, which is sort of generated for you and goes to your error template. And that all happens automatically. And another nice thing about it is that the error substate has, as its default model that gets passed to it, the error that was thrown. Get this nice phase effect brought to you.
Very important to always throw actual errors.
Or you can just rely on the fact that every error that's going to be coming internally is going to correspond to this sort of default JavaScript error API of having a dot message. So for instance, you could say, you could just say message, and let's see what that shows up. No model was found for company.
Oh, nice.
That showed up right in your template. This is sort of easy mode. You don't want to do this in production, but because stack is also a property of this error, which becomes the model of this error substate, you can do this, and suddenly you're getting right in your template some immediate feedback. So again, don't do this for production, but for development, this is a pretty cool trick. Again, all that goes into this is just creating an error.hbs that goes into your templates folder that opts you into the error substate that's going to catch any errors that happen while transitioning into a route.
This unfortunately swallows your error, so you won't see it in your debugger. So we should probably provide a utility that also rethrows it when it does this. So you get the best of both worlds.
True. Cool. Thank you.
Any questions? No one has debugging questions? Fantastic.
Andre. Yeah, so the question for folks at home was that puts the error on a error controller being rendered by the error handlebars and possibly an error view. So you can do all the things you can do in Ember with that.
Yeah, basically, if you can pretend like it was a route that had a dynamic segment, so it has a model attached to it. That just happens with error.
So if you can't reproduce the problem, we were lucky enough we kind of figured out how to reproduce that one. What do you do if you can't reproduce it? And I would say there's a couple of things to think about. One is instrument the code so that when the problem happens again, it will record the information that you wish you had. You want to record that someplace where you're going to see it. So make it, record to a log that's going to email you or so forth. The second thing is think about, well, what are the things that cause hard to reproduce bugs? And to me, there's two things that I often think about. One is race conditions, timing issues. So the reason that I can't reproduce something maybe is because I have a fast connection at the office. So what can I slow down in the process to maybe make things happen? I'll sometimes go into my back end in dev and put in a sleep for 2 seconds before responding. How does my app deal with that?
You can also do that right at your Ajax layer. You can just return a promise that will fulfill 2 seconds after it's supposed to fulfill.
Yep, good point. And then the other one is data problems are sometimes a reason why you can't reproduce. You can't make something happen in your account, but somebody else's, your coworker or user's account, that has no problem reproducing this. So in that case, it's a good idea to try to test this out with their data. So those are a couple of things. Remember, comments can lie to you, logging can lie, your users can lie to you, but the worst of all, the most dangerous of all when you're debugging is that your brain can lie to you. You can make assumptions.
What's the absolute best debugging technique?
The absolute best debugging technique?
It also floats in your bathtub with you.
Oh, the rubber ducky. We forgot to put a slide for this. Yes.
Basically, if you sit there and you're like, I don't know what's going on, just try to explain to absolutely anyone or anything around you what the problem is, and there's a good chance rethinking those thoughts will help you figure out what the problem might be.
So another great Sherlock Holmes quote: "When you've eliminated all which is possible, then whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth." If you ask me at the bar about the jQuery Android bug that I found, it's a great example of this. And Agatha Christie has one similar: "The impossible could not have happened, therefore the impossible must be possible, in spite of appearances." So quick thank yous to Danielle Sucher for her excellent talk, Debugging the Science of Deduction. Check it out on Speaker Deck. She also had a great interview on Ruby Rogues recently. Teddy Zini and the contributors to Ember Inspector. Nick Landolfi that did the visual design implementation on Ember jobs. And to all of you, good luck with debugging. Learn and contribute. Chip into this repo if you want to learn. The job proceeds are going to support the Ember project in some way. Ask Seth about that. And
Pay for the CDN and stickers.
we're going to go to Lily's after this, and while we're wrapping up, I'm going to ask Matt to come up and give a real quick demo of an app that he. Actually, I don't know anything about it, but it's cool.
45 seconds.
Cool. Yeah.
Okay, so this is my most turtlenecked Steve Jobsian one more thing. So I ask you all to channel Steve Jobs for me. Okay, so way back in the day, I worked at this place called Harvest, and they're really great. And they made this library one time called Harvey, and Harvey was really cool because as you resize your screen, Harvey gives you a little JavaScript thing, and you can tell like what media query you have. It's got a really slick syntax, and it's kind of jQuery-ish. Yeah, I guess this is it right here. So Harvey attach, and then you just like give it a bunch of different, like a query selector, and it'll fire something when you come in or out. This is pretty neat, but this, of course, doesn't work super well for Ember. I don't know what happened.
Is it Flux or is it?
Oh, maybe it's Flux. Sorry. Actually, I have no idea what it was. Okay. I think it was the cable. Okay, well, you can all see what's going on. But, so I had the luck to work with these guys from FreshBooks recently, and they made this project called Ember-responsive, which is the same kind of vibe, but it does a similar thing for Ember itself. So here we have an app responsive, and you give it media, and then you define some types. So this is mobile, and tablet, and desktop. And you give them a media query string, and then you can call get, and they say like, oh, this is going to be true. And you can even use them in templates, which is really neat. So now we can go ahead and do some fun stuff. They didn't have a demo yet when you click on the demo button, so we just made a nice little demo JS bin. And we can see we're using that same syntax here. So I'm going to hide the templates for a moment. And we say short, tiny, mobile, and big. And then we're even going to do some crazy stuff and look for a high DPI. And we're going to look for if you're in Firefox or Chrome by setting a really low minimum DPI and using it as a selector for the browser to do browser detection. And then we have some observers. So if we go too small, we'll fire something. If we go too short, we'll fire something. And just some other sugar. And if we check it out, this is a medium-sized window in Chrome. And it has no high dippy. Oh, that doesn't seem right. But if I make it big, then I get to big. And if I go all the way down, actually, haha, it is not high dippy because I'm plugged into the projector. Ooh, it works. And if you go really small, then it'll tell you you're small. And, oh, I'm way too small. Oh, that's not cool at all. And then sure enough, if I open up Firefox, oh, it knows I'm in Firefox. That's like so awesome. Isn't that so cool? And yeah, so Justin Bull and a bunch of awesome folks over at FreshBooks just put this out. And it's really neat, and nobody's touched it yet. And so you should take a look at it and let them know what you think. And if you find any bugs or have any ideas for what they can do to enhance it, I'm sure they'd really, really welcome them. This, I believe, you just need to, so Ember itself in Ember CLI and Ember AppKit is not modularized. It's just a global called Ember on the window. And this just hooks into Ember at that level in the same way that Ember Data or something does. So really, you should just be able to, the one caveat is that you need to have your application extended, and then you can call application responsive on it, and then you need to create your app afterward. So you can't call responsive on an app that's been created. You can only call it on an app that's been extended. But that's the only like quirky little thing that I've seen thus far. Besides that, it seems really amazing. Cool. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you all. You've been troopers. This has been a long one. I hope you all enjoyed it. We'll see you at Hacker Hours or next month, and hopefully tonight at Lily's.